Three Laughing Priests, the story that can change your life, motivationals. In the valley of Kumgang, nestled between mountains that touch the clouds like reverent fingers reaching toward heaven, there existed a village where no one had laughed in 17 years. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that pressed against eardrums and made children forget the sound of their own joy. Rice paddies stretched in geometric precision, farmers bent over their work with mechanical efficiency, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath when it passed through the narrow streets. The village elders remembered laughter, but only as something distant and dangerous, like lightning on a far horizon. They'd forbidden it after the Great Sorrow, when the warlords' armies had come through and taken everything worth taking, including the village's ability to find light in darkness. Survival became the only acceptable emotion. Efficiency replaced joy. The mechanical rhythm of daily work drowned out everything else. On the first day of the 7th month, when peach blossoms were just beginning to fall like pink snow, a stranger appeared on the eastern road. He was young, perhaps 25, with a face like polished bronze and eyes that crinkled at the corners as if perpetually on the verge of amusement. He wore the simple robes of a wandering priest, dyed the color of sunrise, orange fading into yellow fading into gold. His walking staff clicked against the stones with a rhythm that seemed almost musical. When he reached the village square, he stopped, set down his traveling pack, and did something the villagers hadn't witnessed in nearly 2 decades. He threw back his head and laughed. Not a polite chuckle or a restrained smile, but a full-bodied, cascading laugh that started in his belly and erupted like water from a mountain spring. It was the sound of morning itself, fresh and new and utterly unafraid. The villagers who heard it froze. Some covered their ears. Others looked around nervously, as if expecting punishment from invisible authorities. An old woman actually wept, though whether from memory or fear, no one could say. The young priest stopped laughing and surveyed the frozen faces around him with genuine curiosity. "I am Jiho," he announced to no one in particular, priest of the morning laughter. "I've walked 300 miles to reach this place, guided by a dream of mountains and silence. Tell me, friends, why does your village feel like a held breath?" No one answered. They simply stared at this strange young man who seemed to carry sunrise in his very presence. But what happened next would change everything. A second stranger appeared, this time from the southern road, arriving just as the noon sun reached its apex and painted everything in stark, honest light. This priest was perhaps 40 years old, his face weathered by experience but strong, like aged timber that survived countless storms. He wore robes the color of earth and stone, browns and grays that spoke of endurance. His laughter, when it came, was different from Jiho's. It was steady, rhythmic, like the sound of a water wheel turning or a hammer striking an anvil. It was the laughter of perseverance, of finding humor in the daily grind, of choosing joy in the midst of ordinary struggle. "I am Minyu," he said, bowing respectfully to the assembled villagers and to Jiho, priest of the noon laughter. "I too was called here by dreams I couldn't ignore, dreams of a valley that had forgotten how to breathe." Jiho studied this newcomer with interest. "Your laughter is different from mine." "As morning differs from noon," Minyu replied. "Each has its place." The villagers remained silent, but now their silence held a quality of anticipation, like the moment before a storm breaks. The third priest arrived as sunset painted the mountains crimson and gold. He was old, perhaps 70, with a face like carved mahogany and eyes that held the accumulated wisdom of 1,000 sunsets. His robes were deep purple, the color of twilight, and he moved with the deliberate grace of someone who understood that every step was a gift. When he laughed, it was soft and knowing, like wind through autumn leaves, like the sound the earth makes when it settles into winter rest. It held no urgency, no agenda, only the deep satisfaction of someone who'd lived fully and found the cosmic humor in existence itself. "I am Disham," he said, his voice gentle but carrying surprising strength, priest of the evening laughter. "I have journeyed far to stand in this valley that dreams showed me, this place where laughter went to die. Now the three priests stood in the village square, forming an unintended triangle, each representing a different time of day, a different quality of joy. The villagers watched, mesmerized and terrified in equal measure. The village chief, a man named Sung who carried the weight of 17 silent years in the lines around his mouth, finally stepped forward. "We don't laugh here," he said flatly. "We work, we survive. Laughter is for fools who haven't learned that life is suffering." Jiho's morning laughter bubbled up irrepressibly. "Life is suffering. Then shouldn't we laugh precisely because of that?" Sung's face hardened. "You don't understand. Laughter brings attention. Attention brings danger. We've learned to be invisible." Minyu's steady presence seemed to ground the conversation. "We understand more than you think. But tell me, Chief Sung, has your silence protected you? Or has it simply made you forget what you were trying to protect?" The chief had no answer. The secret behind the valley's silence was more shocking than anyone imagined. That night, after the priests had been grudgingly given shelter in the village's small temple, a young woman named Hana approached them. She was perhaps 19, with eyes that still held a glimmer of suppressed life. She worked in the tea house, one of the few places where villagers gathered, though even there, conversation was muted and joyless. "I need to tell you something," she whispered, glancing nervously at the door, "about why we don't laugh." The three priests leaned closer, their different energies creating a strange harmony in the small room. 17 years ago there was a boy. His name was Quan. He was 7 years old and he had the most beautiful laugh you've ever heard, pure and wild and free. When the warlord's men came through, taking our rice and our valuables, this boy, he couldn't help himself. He saw one of the soldiers slip in mud and he laughed. Just a child's laugh, nothing malicious, just genuine amusement at the absurdity of a mighty warrior covered in muck. Her voice caught. The soldier was humiliated. He grabbed the boy and she couldn't finish. Disham's evening eyes filled with ancient compassion, and the village blamed the laughter, not the soldier. "We blamed ourselves for allowing joy when the world was cruel," Hana said. "The elders decreed that laughter attracted evil, that silence was safety, that joy was selfish when others were suffering. It seemed logical at the time. Now it's just who we are." Jiho's morning brightness flickered. But punishing laughter for a soldier's cruelty is like cursing the sun for casting shadows. Minyu added, "You've spent 17 years in a prison of your own making, thinking it was a fortress." The three priests looked at each other, and something passed between them. An understanding, a recognition that they'd been brought together for a reason larger than any of them had imagined. But their different approaches to laughter, initially a source of wonder, quickly became a source of friction. The next morning, Jiho woke at dawn and immediately began his practice in the temple courtyard. His morning laughter rang out across the still sleeping village like a declaration of war against darkness. It was exuberant, irrepressible, sometimes almost manic in its insistence on joy. Minyu, practical and grounded, approached him after 20 minutes. "You'll scare them," he said bluntly. "Your laughter is too much too soon. They need something they can work with, something steady they can build on." Jiho's eyes flashed. "They need to remember what joy feels like. You can't ease into light after 17 years of darkness. You have to burst through." "You burst through and they'll slam the door shut permanently," Minyu countered. "Real change takes time. Consistent, daily, unglamorous time." Disham watched from the temple steps, his evening wisdom seeing both perspectives. "You're both right," he said softly, "and both wrong." Both younger priests turned to him. "Morning laughter opens the day, but noon laughter sustains it. Neither means anything without evening laughter to give it context and completion. We are three parts of a whole, but we're acting like three separate priests competing for the same space." What they discovered next would change everything. That afternoon, without consulting each other, all three priests began working with different segments of the village population. Jiho gravitated toward the children, the few who could still remember what play felt like. He didn't try to make them laugh directly. Instead, he showed them games, told them stories, created situations where laughter became a natural response rather than a forced performance. Minyu found himself among the farmers and craftspeople, the ones who rose before dawn and worked until sunset. His noon laughter became something they could incorporate into their daily rhythms. A chuckle at a broken tool instead of cursing. A shared moment of amusement when rice plants grew in unexpected patterns. Small, sustainable moments of joy woven into the fabric of ordinary work. Disham sat with the elders, the ones who carried the deepest wounds and the heaviest guilt. He didn't try to convince them that their pain was invalid. Instead, his evening laughter acknowledged the full spectrum of life, the suffering and the joy, the loss and the gain, the endings that make new beginnings possible. With him, they began to laugh at their own stubbornness, at the cosmic absurdity of trying to control life by eliminating joy. For 3 weeks, the priests worked separately, each making small progress. Children began to smile around Jiho. Farmers started humming while they worked near Minyu. Elders found themselves sharing stories of the old days with Disham, stories that sometimes ended in soft, knowing laughter. But the village remained fundamentally divided. The three approaches to laughter created 3 separate camps, each convinced their priest had the right way forward. Arguments broke out. A young father who'd learned Jiho's morning laughter clashed with his own father, who preferred Disham's evening reflection. A farmer who followed Minyu's practical approach got into a heated debate with her sister, who'd embraced Jiho's exuberance. The priests themselves felt the division. They still shared the same temple, but their conversations grew stiff and formal. Each was convinced their approach was correct, that the others were well-meaning but misguided. That's when the 3 very different laughter styles created something miraculous, though none of them recognized it at first. A little girl, perhaps 5 years old, approached Jiho one morning in the square. Her name was Cyan, and she had enormous eyes and a shy smile that appeared and vanished like a butterfly. "Priest Jiho," she said, "can you teach me your morning laugh?" He knelt down to her level, his face lighting up. "Of course, it starts like this." He demonstrated his exuberant, cascading laughter. She tried to copy it but couldn't quite manage the full expression. It felt too big for her small body. "That's okay," he assured her. "It takes practice." Later that day, she found Minyu working with her father in the rice paddies. "Priest Minyu, can you teach me your noon laugh?" Minyu wiped sweat from his brow and showed her his steady, rhythmic chuckle. She tried it, found it easier than Jiho's but still not quite right. That evening, she approached Disham as he sat watching the sunset from the temple steps. "Priest Disham, can you teach me your evening laugh?" The old priest's eyes crinkled with deep warmth. "I can try, little one, but evening laughter is something you grow into, not learn." She sat next to him in silence for a long moment, then said something that would echo through all 3 priests' minds. "Why can't I use all 3? Morning laugh when I wake up, noon laugh when I work, evening laugh when I rest." Disham stared at her. Out of the mouths of children, he thought, why indeed? But before this wisdom could take root, disaster struck. A messenger arrived on horseback, covered in dust and fear. "The warlord's son is coming," he gasped. He heard rumors of priests teaching forbidden practices. "He's bringing soldiers. He'll be here in 3 days." The village erupted in panic. Chief Sung confronted the 3 priests in the square, his face twisted with 17 years of suppressed rage. "This is your fault. Your laughter brought attention just like before. You've condemned us all." Jiho stepped forward, his morning brightness dimmed but not extinguished. "Then we'll face it together." "Face it?" Sung's laugh was bitter and broken. "You don't understand what these men are capable of. They don't just kill, they destroy everything that makes life worth living." Minyu's steady voice cut through the chaos. "They already did that. 17 years ago, you let them take your laughter. They didn't even have to be here to keep you imprisoned. The truth hit the villagers like a physical blow. They'd been living in fear of ghosts, of possibilities, of shadows. The real enemy wasn't the warlord or his son. It was their own capitulation to terror. Disham spoke with evening gentleness. You have 3 days. We can spend them in fear, or we can spend them remembering who you were before you forgot how to laugh. What happened next proved that even ancient wisdom needs modern application. The three priests finally sat down together without ego, without competition, without insisting their way was the only way. I was wrong, Jiho admitted, his morning pride humbled. Morning laughter alone is just noise. It needs foundation. Minyu nodded slowly. And noon laughter without morning's hope or evening's wisdom is just grinding endurance, survival without purpose. Disham smiled. Evening laughter without the other two is resignation dressed up as acceptance. We need each other. They spent that entire night in conversation, discovering how their three approaches weren't competing philosophies but interconnected parts of a greater whole. Morning laughter cracked open possibility. Noon laughter gave it practical shape and sustainable rhythm. Evening laughter provided context and deep understanding. By dawn, they had a plan. They called the entire village to the square, every man, woman, and child. The three priests stood together, and for the first time, they didn't stand as separate individuals but as a unified presence. Jiho spoke first. We have 3 days before the warlord's son arrives. We're going to teach you something that can't be taken away, can't be stolen, can't be destroyed by any external force. Minyu continued. We're going to teach you that laughter isn't a luxury, it's not frivolous, it's not selfish. It's the most fundamental act of human resistance against despair. Disham concluded. We're going to teach you all 3 laughter types and how they work together to create something unbreakable. The training began immediately. They started with the children because children learn fastest and teach adults through their example. Jiho taught them morning laughter, the explosive, joyful greeting of a new day, the refusal to let yesterday's sorrows poison today's possibilities. The children took to it like birds learning to fly. Minyu worked with the adults, teaching them to find humor in daily struggle. Not toxic positivity that denied real hardship, but the genuine ability to chuckle at absurdity while still doing the necessary work. A farmer whose plow broke learned to laugh at the timing while fixing it. A mother whose children were being difficult learned to see the cosmic comedy in tiny humans with enormous personalities. Disham gathered the elders and the wounded. He taught them that evening laughter wasn't about forgetting pain or pretending wounds didn't exist. It was about achieving enough distance from suffering to see its place in the larger pattern, to understand that the same life that brought unbearable loss also brought indescribable beauty, and that both deserved to be honored. But the real breakthrough came on the second day when they started teaching integration. Morning laughter to start the day, noon laughter to sustain through challenges, evening laughter to reflect and integrate. The cycle repeated, creating a rhythm more powerful than any single approach. The village began to transform, not superficially but at a fundamental level. People stood straighter. Eyes that had been dull for 17 years began to shine. Conversations grew animated, and laughter, tentative at first then stronger, began to echo through streets that had been silent for so long. Little Cyan became their unexpected ambassador. She'd absorbed all 3 laughter types and moved between them with unconscious grace. Morning laugh when she woke up, loud and joyful. Noon laugh during her chores, finding humor in spilled water and scattered rice. Evening laugh when her grandmother told stories, a soft appreciation of life's full tapestry. The other children copied her, then their parents, then the skeptical elders who'd been sure this was all foolishness. By the 3rd morning, when scouts reported the warlord's son was hours away, the village was ready, not with weapons or defenses, but with something far more powerful. Chief Sung approached the three priests. His face had changed. The lines of bitterness had softened into something else, not erased but transformed. Whatever happens today, thank you. You gave us back something we thought was lost forever. The warlord's son arrived at noon, accompanied by 20 soldiers. He was young, perhaps 30, wearing elaborate armor and carrying himself with the arrogance of someone who'd never been truly challenged. He expected to find a cowering village, easy to intimidate, easy to extract tribute from. Instead, he found people working in the fields, children playing in the square, elders sitting in the tea house, and all of them in various ways and at various moments laughing. He rode into the square and demanded to see the village chief. Sung came forward and the young warlord studied him with confused irritation. I heard reports of disturbance, of forbidden practices, of priests teaching dangerous ideologies. Sung smiled, and it was genuine. We have 3 priests teaching us to laugh. If that's dangerous, then yes, we're quite dangerous. Laughter, the warlord's son looked around, genuinely baffled. That's it. That's what the messenger was so panicked about. Minyu stepped forward, his noon presence steady and unintimidating. Your father's soldiers came here 17 years ago. They took our rice, our valuables, and accidentally our joy. We blamed ourselves and locked away our laughter. These priests helped us remember that joy isn't something that can be taken, only surrendered. The young warlord dismounted, and for the first time his arrogance cracked slightly. 17 years ago, that was the campaign where a soldier killed a child for laughing. Silence fell over the square. That soldier was disciplined, the young warlord continued. Severely. My father doesn't tolerate unnecessary cruelty, but you never reported the incident properly. You just went silent. Disham's evening wisdom recognized the truth beneath the words. And you've lived with guilt about something you didn't even know the full details of. The young warlord's face worked through several emotions. I was 13 when that campaign happened. I remember my father coming home furious about a soldier who'd killed a child. He said it was the kind of senseless cruelty that turned people into enemies instead of subjects, but he never knew which village, which child. The reports were incomplete. What happened in the next moments would echo through generations. Little Cyan, fearless in the way only children can be, walked up to the young warlord and asked, "Do you know how to laugh?" He stared down at her, this tiny girl with enormous eyes. Yes, of course. Show me, she demanded. I don't, this isn't. The morning priest says laughter breaks down walls between people. Show me yours. Slowly, uncertainly, the young warlord laughed. It was rusty and awkward, like machinery that hadn't been used in years, but it was genuine. Cyan clapped her hands. That was a noon laugh, like Priest Minyu teaches. Now try a morning laugh like Priest Jiho. Despite himself, despite the absurdity of taking instructions from a 5-year-old, he tried. His morning laugh was terrible, forced, and mechanical, but something in his face shifted. A crack in armor he didn't even know he was wearing. Now evening laugh like Priest Disham, Cyan instructed, unstoppable in her mission. This time when he laughed, it carried real emotion, sadness and relief, and the recognition of cosmic absurdity. He was a warlord's son, taking laughter lessons from a child in a village his father's forces had traumatized. The priests watched this unfold with growing wonder. They hadn't orchestrated this. They'd simply created the conditions for it to happen. The young warlord sat down right there in the square, his soldiers looking completely confused. Tell me about the 3 laughters, he said to Cyan, and she did, with all the enthusiasm of a new convert. An hour later he was still there, this powerful man, learning from priests and a child about something his wealth and position had never taught him. His soldiers, seeing their leader transformed, began to relax. Some of them started talking with villagers. Barriers that had seemed permanent dissolved like morning mist. As sunset approached, the young warlord stood. I came here expecting to find dangerous radicals. Instead, I found teachers. My father needs to hear this message. The entire province needs to hear this message. He turned to the three priests. Will you come to the capital? Will you teach this to others? Jiho looked at Minyu, looked at Disham. Three separate people who'd become something greater than their individual parts. We'll teach anyone who wants to learn, Jiho said. But first, we need to finish here. Over the next weeks, the transformation of Kumgang Valley became complete. The laughter that had started as technique became authentic expression. People stopped performing joy and started embodying it. And the three priests began to understand their own deeper lesson. One evening, sitting in the temple watching the sunset, they finally articulated what they'd learned. I thought morning laughter was enough, Jiho admitted. I thought if people just had enough enthusiasm, enough optimism, they could overcome anything. I was wrong. Morning without noon becomes manic delusion. Without evening, it's just noise. Minyu nodded. I thought noon laughter was the only honest approach. That daily perseverance was what really mattered. But noon without morning loses hope. Without evening, it's just grinding endurance that leads to bitterness. Disham's evening voice carried deep emotion. And I thought evening laughter was the highest wisdom. That acceptance and perspective were the ultimate goals. But evening without morning and noon is just resignation. It's giving up dressed in philosophical robes. They sat in silence, understanding finally integrated into their bones. We need each other, Jiho said simply. Not as competing philosophies, but as essential parts of a whole. Morning opens, Minyu added. Noon sustains, evening integrates. But they only work as a cycle, not as isolated moments. Disham smiled his ancient smile. The little girl understood this immediately. It took us 3 grown men weeks of conflict to figure it out. They laughed together then, and their laughter blended. Morning brightness, noon steadiness, evening depth. It created a sound that was more than the sum of its parts. The message that emerged from their experience rippled outward. The young warlord kept his word. He brought them to the capital, where they taught soldiers and merchants, nobles and farmers. The 3 laughter types spread like light across the province. But more importantly, they taught the deeper lesson, that life isn't about choosing one approach and sticking with it rigidly. It's about understanding that we need different energies at different times. Morning enthusiasm to begin new ventures. Noon perseverance to sustain through difficulty. Evening wisdom to reflect and integrate experience. Young people resonated with Jiho's morning laughter, seeing in it permission to dream big and start fresh. Middle-aged people found validation in Minyu's noon laughter, discovering that their daily struggles had dignity and could contain joy. Elders found comfort in Disham's evening laughter, understanding that their accumulated experience wasn't obsolescence but essential wisdom. But the real transformation happened when people stopped identifying exclusively with one priest and recognized that they needed access to all 3 energies throughout each day. A farmer could start his morning with Jiho's exuberant greeting of a new day, sustain through challenging work with Minyu's steady chuckle, and end his evening with Disham's reflective appreciation. The same person, moving through different laughter types as naturally as the sun moves across the sky. Years later, when all 3 priests were old men sitting on a temple step watching sunset, a young monk approached them. Masters, I want to learn the secret of laughter. Which type should I study? The 3 old priests looked at each other and laughed, their separate sounds blending into harmony. All of them, they said in unison. But which one is most important? Jiho's voice, still bright despite his age. Morning laughter teaches you that every day is a new beginning, that yesterday's failures don't determine today's possibilities. Minyu's voice, steady as always. Noon laughter teaches you that ordinary work contains extraordinary meaning, that perseverance itself is a form of joy. Disham's voice, deep with accumulated wisdom. Evening laughter teaches you that endings are not failures, that reflection and completion have their own beauty. But, they said together, trying to live with only one creates imbalance. Morning without noon and evening becomes exhausting mania. Noon without morning and evening becomes grinding joylessness. Evening without morning and noon becomes paralyzing resignation. The young monk frowned. So I have to learn all three perfectly. No, Disham said gently. You have to understand that you're always moving through all three, whether you acknowledge it or not. Life itself is the cycle. We just gave it names and practices to make it conscious rather than unconscious. The monk sat down, processing this. So the secret isn't learning to laugh. It's learning to recognize the different types of laughter life requires and having access to all of them. Now you're beginning to understand, Jiho said, his morning brightness still present even in his advanced years. The lesson spread beyond laughter techniques into something more fundamental, an understanding of human wholeness. People stopped trying to be one thing all the time. They gave themselves permission to be exuberant beginners in the morning, steady workers at noon, and wise reflectors in the evening. Parents taught their children all three types, not as rigid categories but as natural rhythms. Today feels like a morning laugh day, a child might say, or I need some noon laugh to get through this task, or this situation needs evening laugh to really understand it. The vocabulary of the three laughters became shorthand for emotional and energetic states. People developed fluency in moving between them, recognizing that psychological health required access to all three, not mastery of just one. The village of Kumgang became a pilgrimage site, not because it housed sacred relics or holy shrines, but because it was where the integration happened, where three separate priests discovered they were three parts of one teaching, where laughter returned to a silent valley and transformed it into a living example of human resilience. The three priests eventually passed away, as all humans do. Jiho went first, his morning brightness fading with a smile on his face and words of encouragement for those gathered around his bed. Minyu followed a few years later, his steady presence maintained until his final breath. Dishim lived to be 97, his evening wisdom deepening until the end. But their teaching didn't die with them. It had taken root too deeply in too many hearts. The cycle of morning, noon, and evening laughter became as natural as breathing to the people who'd learned it. Generations later, when asked about the three priests, old villagers would smile and say, "They taught us that life requires different energies at different times. That morning without evening is incomplete, that noon without morning loses direction, that evening without noon lacks substance. They taught us that we're not meant to be one thing all the time. We're meant to flow through all the phases, honoring each one, integrating them into wholeness." The most profound impact came in how people approach challenges. When facing new beginnings or unexpected opportunities, they channeled morning laughter, open, optimistic, willing to try. When enduring difficult circumstances or long-term struggles, they accessed noon laughter, steady, persistent, finding humor in the daily grind. When processing loss or integrating complex experiences, they drew on evening laughter, reflective, wise, able to see the larger patterns. This wasn't positive thinking or denial of difficulty. It was something more sophisticated, the recognition that human beings need access to multiple emotional and energetic states to navigate life's complexity. That trying to force one approach onto every situation creates rigidity and suffering. A merchant might use morning laughter to launch a new venture, noon laughter to sustain through the challenging middle period, and evening laughter to reflect on lessons learned regardless of outcome. A mother might greet her children with morning brightness, sustain through daily care with noon steadiness, and tuck them in with evening gentleness. The same person, the same day, different energies as needed. The integration of the three laughter types revealed something essential about human nature. We're designed for cycles, not static states. We're built to move through phases, not remain fixed. The suffering comes from trying to be one thing all the time, from identifying so completely with one energy that we lose access to the others. Young people who tried to maintain morning enthusiasm 24 hours a day burned out. Adults who lived in perpetual noon grind became bitter. Elders who existed only in evening reflection became disconnected from life's ongoing vitality. But those who learned to flow through all three phases, honoring each one, found a kind of resilience and joy that external circumstances couldn't destroy. The teaching spread far beyond the original valley. It crossed mountains and rivers, reaching villages and cities, temples and palaces. Everywhere it went, it transformed not by imposing rigid rules, but by offering a framework that felt intuitively true. People recognized themselves in the cycle. They'd experienced morning's hope, noon's endurance, evening's wisdom, even if they'd never had words for it. The three priests had simply made conscious what was already happening unconsciously, giving people tools to navigate their own internal rhythms with greater awareness and skill. In the end, the story of the three laughing priests became less about three individuals and more about a universal truth, that human wholeness requires integration of seemingly different parts, that the morning person and the evening person aren't different people, but different aspects of the same person at different times. That the key to sustainable joy isn't choosing one approach and white-knuckling your way through everything, but developing enough flexibility to access different energies as situations require. The Valley of Kumgang, once silent and suffering, became a place where laughter echoed from dawn until dusk. Not superficial laughter, not performative joy, but authentic expression of human resilience. Morning laughter greeting each new day with genuine hope. Noon laughter finding humor in ordinary struggles. Evening laughter reflecting on life's full complexity with deep acceptance. And if you visited that valley, even centuries later, you'd still hear the echo of three distinct laughter types, blending into something that sounded like life itself. Beginning, continuing, completing, and beginning again. The eternal cycle that the three priests didn't create but simply helped people remember and honor.